In America, we have lots of plans to reduce crime, but with a failure to execute. An examination of capital punishment in Japan, today on The 10th Man. A murderer was executed in Alabama, ending his long, inhumane wait on death row. Capital punishment is again under discussion, making it a good time to discuss violent crime rates in the U.S. versus rates in the Far East. Japan is often held up as an example for the U.S. to follow in order to reduce crime here. The gun law obsessed, people who can only keep a single thought in their heads at one time, point to the rate of gun ownership as if it's the single distinction between our countries. That's absurd, of course. Guns don't cause crime, but more crime leads to more gun ownership, and there are dozens of cultural factors distinguishing our countries. The major difference between us is crime and punishment, including capital punishment. America bashers love to find a single factor and say, here is the reason the Japanese live longer. They eat seafood. Well, they also eat whale meat and carp jizz, but somehow those delicacies are not being promoted here in the U.S. Everybody has his own axe to grind, but sociologists know, the old white guys at least, that societies are complex. Kidding aside, all sociologists know this, not just the old white guys, but most are either dishonest or afraid to say so. Therefore, it's up to us to put the pieces together. Japanese society is very different from ours, and in general, they are more conformist. Tattoos, for example, are forbidden and used to be illegal. There's no police brutality movement in Japan. Your neighbors are more likely to turn you in and cheer for the police than to take videos of your arrest and protest on Instagram. When there is an arrest, there's no mob of relatives with a high-profile lawyer and preacher demanding your civil rights. The entire family instead is shamed. Those are just a few examples. Then there's capital punishment. The gun law obsessed are experts at stacking statistics. As our grandfathers used to say, there are lies, there are damn lies, then there are statistics. Truth be told, my grandfathers never used such language, and I try to avoid it myself. The media report the homicide rate in the U.S. is around 6 deaths per 100,000, and in Japan it's only 0.25 per 100,000. For people who only understand 6th grade math, they can impressively state that our murder rate is 20 times as high as Japan's. Even leaving out the fact that most of our murders have underlying factors like drugs, which are illegal in Japan, even marijuana, we're still talking about murders being rare here versus very rare in Japan. Like your odds of being struck by lightning versus being bitten by a shark, it's still rare. So let's use some real numbers to show that one big reason for Japan's low murder rate is capital punishment, as bad as that is. In Japan, 99% of the people arrested are convicted. You may remember the case of Carlos Ghosn, the CEO of Nissan Motors, who fled Japan after being arrested. He shone a light on their legal system. In Japan, the police can arrest you and detain you for more than 3 weeks without charging you. 23 days. Ghosn claimed that they first held him for the maximum time, then released him with the intention of arresting him on a different charge, then repeating again and again. This they do until they get a confession. By comparison, President Bukele, the new law and order president of El Salvador, was criticized globally when he started rounding up the drug cartels and giving the police 15 days to arraign them. The United Nations was outraged when in Japan, 3 weeks has been normal for years. The Japanese police extract confessions in most cases, and the 99% convicted go to prison. Once in prison, every minute of their day is regulated. They have 30 minutes of exercise. They wear uniforms and they march to work making shoes or soap. They have to keep silence except during breaks and free time. And all conversations, TV, and books must be in Japanese. And once a year there's a picnic outside the prison where the citizens come to eat, play games, get face paint, and celebrate their safe country. The Japanese culture loves its police and prisons. Attitudes are everything, and the attitudes in Japan are different. But what about capital punishment? First of all, capital punishment in Japan is subject to appeal. Not like the US where appeal is to reduce the penalty, no. You see, in Japan, the judges are evaluated based on how many cases they can clear in a year, and sometimes a case is rushed through and justice is not served. In those cases, the prosecutor can appeal to increase the penalty to capital punishment. We'll get to the numbers that count in just a minute, but right now, please take a minute to hit like and subscribe. This is pretty good stuff, right? Next, there's the method of execution. How much time in the news cycle is wasted discussing the method? The hypocrisy is that capital punishment is the only topic where we discuss the humanity of the punishment, and we could spend some time on that. All criminal sentences are punishment and a deprivation of rights. It doesn't matter very much how you execute someone. But if it did, the fact is, man has known how to humanely execute condemned criminals ever since William Marwood of England perfected the long drop method of hanging in 1872. He eliminated botched executions using mathematics and produced tables for others to use. The relevance here being that hanging is what they use in Japan. Then there's the timing and schedule. Here in the US, prisoners are given 30 days notice of their execution so that all the do-gooders can protest outside the prison and get on TV. In Japan, however, the condemned man is not told until the very day of execution, sometimes only an hour ahead. His family is notified of the event only after it's over. Those are some intriguing facts, but let's talk about the numbers. All of these discussions are numbers games, and you have to think about why they choose the numbers they do. The number of murders per 100,000? Does a potential killer give any thought to the nation's murder rate? Those numbers are an attempt to blame society instead of blaming the criminal. The man who is intent to kill will do so. What is to stop him? Here's what will stop him. This number. In the US in 2022, there were 26,000 murders and 18 executions. In Japan, there were 300 murders and 15 executions. Japan had about the same number of executions for 300 murders as we had for 26,000 murders. That's 87 times as many murders. 87 times. The politicians are telling us we have 20 times as many murders per capita, when they should be telling us we only have 1/90th as many murderers being punished in the US as in Japan. Japan is way ahead on justice. Anybody can do this math, but nobody does. If you are hearing this for the first time, then every criminal in Japan knows something you don't. He knows he's almost 90 times as likely to be executed for murder in Japan as he would be in the US. The criminal mind is not complicated, and neither is crime and punishment. Capital punishment is horrible, but murder is worse. Society needs to hate crime more than it hates punishment. That formula is working in Japan.